Hello, everybody. My name is Polly Hammond, and you are listening to Uncorked, the Italian wine podcast series about all things marketing and communication. Join me each week for candid conversations with experts from within and beyond the wine world as we explore what it takes to build a profitable business in today's constantly shifting environment. In today's episode, we are joined by Erica Crawford, an absolute legend in the wine industry, even though she will probably cringe at me saying that. Erica has been ahead of the curve since day one, first building one of New Zealand's largest export brands, and now is the driving force behind Love Block. Yet again, she sets a new standard for winemaking and wine business building. Today, I talk with Erica about the evolving wine market, the changing customers, and what it takes to build not one, but two powerhouse brands. Let's get into it. Welcome, Erica. Thank you so much for being here today and joining us for this discussion.
Hi, Polly. Nice to see you again or hear from you. It's been a little while since we caught up in Auckland here.
I know, and it is a joy for me to have my Kiwis, despite that accent. We're both Kiwis, and neither one of us have the right accent. When we started this series for the Italian Wine Podcast, our mandate is, of course, communication, marketing, and strategy. And I was thinking about the people who are in my immediate circle who, frankly, are absolute ballers when it comes to how they market and communicate their brand. And you were one of the very first people that I thought of. And anyone who knows you knows how hard you work for Love Block. So I wanted to take this chance to actually kind of interrogate you about how you make some decisions, how it factors into everyday life, what the team looks like. And what it means to really have come from the legacy brand, that existed before Love Block. I don't want to dwell too much on Kim Crawford, but there's no way that we can pretend it doesn't exist or didn't contribute to where you are today. What I'm most curious about is that when you were when you were mentally shifting the story from the Kim Crawford story to the Love Block story, there was a period of time in there where you were under a restraint of trade and you didn't have a public brand. But how did you actually have to change your thinking around the narrative? Or how did you have to control a public narrative that maybe was not your own?
Yeah, it was quite interesting. I mean, the good thing about non-competes is that it actually gives you a buffer time to get your head around all those things. Because it was a tremendous shift, because we lived and breathed that brand, it was our whole lives. And so that buffer period did give us time to make a mind shift. And of course, that happened, it was the beginning, it was 2008 for me, 2009, so beginning of 2009. And then we were constrained until about, I think it's 2012. The good thing about that is, as I say, it gives you time to do other things. And for me, I got involved in other small businesses, so skincare, fashion, really got my, invested in some of these companies, helped some of these companies. So it was really interesting learning other industries, but also that business is business and the same principles apply,
Or should.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed that, especially, natural skincare and the Huff of Fashion brand, which is sort of an icon New Zealand brand. So learned a lot from those industries. And we think we've got it tough in the wine industry producing one vintage a year. They've got to drop two, a summer and winter range. So I took quite a few learnings from that.
So can you share what some of those were?
Well,
are there any that really stand out in your memory?
Yes, if it's too cold or too warm, then the new season doesn't turn. And then there's specific time periods when you drop the new range, early spring, you drop summer. And, inventory control is absolutely vital. And of course, they've got levers to pull. It's not like wine where you get X amount of fruit and you've got to process it. They can turn it off or turn it on. But mostly the clothes are made, the garments are made and it's ready to go and shop. If it's too warm for a long period, then you can't sell your winter range through. So they've got very fine parameters of inventory control that they've got to stay with, and tremendously difficult. So I have a lot of respect for people in that industry.
You recently did an interview with one of our most famous or infamous morning show hosts in New Zealand, where you were discussing issues with our New Zealand vintage numbers and kind of expectations on supply chain. Is that something that you can talk about a little bit with us? You know, where you think we are, where we're going, and how this is a reflection of what's going on in the greater wine world?
So the wine world, I think the whole world in terms of moving product is in tremendous turmoil. But let's start with New Zealand. So New Zealand, because it's cool climate, we get, every 5 years or so, we get a really short vintage because it's cool climate and, our flowering is in a very vulnerable period when we can get either too much wind or too cold or frost. So every 5 years or so, we get a really short vintage. And what that does is to just normalize, the inventory and the supply chain.
Do you think that our business models actually take that into account when we're pricing? Because I find that pricing wine is one of the spaces that globally we consistently get wrong. If we were retail, we would account for shrink. Do we account for it in the wine industry?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if you look in if you just go to your local supermarket or try and buy some shoes, everything is more expensive because it's more expensive to move product from A to B. Wine somehow is an anomaly in that it's not allowed to increase the price.
And whose fault is that, do you think? Like if fault is a heavy word, but do you think that it is an unwillingness on our part to make the decision or to market that decision? Or do you think that the consumer has so much choice or is entrenched in their habits that they won't accept those price changes?
I think it's in, particularly if you look at Australia, New Zealand, UK, they've got pretty much the same retail model of grocery multiples moving most of the wine. And what it's done is to create a nation of deal junkies. When last did you buy toilet paper when it's not on special? We all do that, right? And the same with wine. So people they know that if you're in grocery, it's going to go on rotation, it's going to come cheap, and then they buy a case. So we've bred a nation of deal junkies. And it was quite interesting when beer and wine went into grocery, because that was around about early 2000s or late 99, something like that, how buying behavior changed. And so there is that consumers just have that expectation that price is not going to change and they buy largely cheap. And of course, every year.
Hold on, let me just jump in on that. In the context of our retail chain, how much of that is the buyers having expectation and that they can commodify our product and our dependence upon those multi-channels, heavy reliance in some cases upon, say, a grocery store brand, that we are willing then to meet that commodification?
Correct. That's essentially where it starts. Yes. And if you don't take it, then there'll always be someone else who's going to drop their pants and do that. So that, unfortunately, is the situation, especially in, as I say, Australia, New Zealand, UK, where they have a very similar model. So we see that a lot. And subsequently, the rest of us are all fighting for that tiny little bit of space at approximately, it's the same sort of price point-ish in the fine wine and other retail stores. So for New Zealand wine, for instance, New Zealand is the toughest market because the small population, lots of producers, and fewer outlets. So it's very competitive. It's very hard selling New Zealand wine in New Zealand unless you're in grocery doing deals,
One of the things that we all know about you is that you are proverbially pounding a beat. I mean, the number of times that anyone who's in the wine industry sees you in our local establishments actually selling and marketing your wine. Do you feel like that personal connection and your willingness as the managing director or the principal, the founder, whatever title we want to use for it, the fact that you yourself are the one out there building those relationships is one reason that Love Block has been able to gain such traction, not only in New Zealand, but in multiple global markets?
What I've learned in my long life is that relationships are crucially important. I think, and what we've also seen in the last 2 years, not being able to look eye to eye, it has changed things a little. Because for me to get my story to the consumer or to someone in a wine shop, a restaurant, in the US, for instance, it's got to go to my importer, then it's got to go to the distributor, and then it's got to go to the account. So you've got to really make sure that what you want to say dribbles all the way down that supply chain line, just in terms of information that you want to communicate. So being there in person, of course, is different. And I think I miss it terribly. Standing, working, meeting people who are about to buy and drink my wine. Yeah, I think it's crucially important that we start traveling again, because if we're not there, then someone else is going to do that, and we're going to lose our spot.
What strategies have you and your team found are actually working? They may be imperfect, but perhaps they're the best of what we have right now to maintain, especially those overseas relationships.
Yeah, very, very imperfect, very imperfect, very imperfect in my case. I think last year was quite good. We did a lot of Zoom trainings. We did a lot of Zoom tastings, talked to people. But came this year, especially this last lockdown that we went in, people are just fatigued. So that's something we're working on now to do next year, is better communicate, better speak to our consumer and to our trade customers, because it's two different, they want to hear two different things. And so that's where people like you come in very much to help us with that technical journey.
Well, thank you. It's very sweet. I suppose in the context of speaking to our multiple markets. So this is a question that we get a lot of, and we're just going to diverge for a moment and ask this. How do you actually manage that element of cultural differences, language differences, seasonal differences to reach both your gatekeepers and your trade, as well as your consumers in markets that, aren't having summertime Christmases?
Yeah, it's really interesting, Polly, because, I had probably about 18 months at Constellation. And one of the things I really learned from them was to really look at the consumer. And to me, in the new world, there are two sets of consumers. There's a Majesty's consumer, so that'll be, Australia, New Zealand, UK, sort of new world consumers. And then there's, of course, the European consumer, and then there's the North American consumer. And they're quite different. If we just look at Her Majesty's consumer, Australia, New Zealand, UK primarily, and then look at North America, quite different. And
How
the way
so?
we approach them is quite different, The UK is very understated, and they don't like being sold to. Whereas in the US, of course, people are quite open to being spoken to and being approached, and quite, I think also what I've learned is that you've got to be a lot less. You've got to shed your Antipodean. What's the word that I'm looking for, Polly?
Humility.
Yeah, that sort of thing. You've got to shed that. So it's two completely different ways of talking to people. And it's one of the things that we're building now is our communication next year is quite different. Yeah.
To actually reach those markets. And I suppose maybe that's one thing that the remote space has allowed us to do is really perfect how we share a similar story, but we embrace those market tendencies. So, I mean, you're South African by birth. Where do you feel South Africa fits into that linear spectrum of how we communicate our brands?
I think they're super interesting because they sort of sit between old world and new world. I think one of the beautiful things about Australia and New Zealand, for instance, is that there's no long history and tradition of wine. So that's why people can just put wine under screw cap and really innovate both in the vineyard and the winery, because there's no rules to stick to, and there's no expectation of tradition. Where South Africa's got 500 years or something of wine industry experience and tradition and history. So it's a lot more difficult for them to be in that position, and they're a lot more Eurocentric, I think, than Australia and New Zealand is. So fabulous wines and incredible diversity, which,
and continuing to grow. I mean, it has been one of
yeah,
the lovely things to come out of lockdown. I think is there's been a proliferation of public discourse around the quality and the winemakers and the story of South African wine. And of course, as an industry, we've all really rallied around South Africa because there's been so much adversity
yeah.
to their sales. So just kind of going back to some of the decisions that you made when you were shifting from the old brand to the new, there's this wonderful story that's been written up that says when you were moving house in Auckland, you found a piece of paper where you and Kim had written your goals for Kim Crawford, which was grow the brand, sell it within 9 years, and then buy land.
Yeah.
When
So
you set forward to build Love Block, did you do the same thing? Did you write that goal list?
I think everybody laughed at us when we told them that, so we just stopped telling people. But I'm old, and I'm a big fan of the old desk pad, and I keep them. I keep these pages because there's always notes on it.
Sure.
So I found one of those, and there was in a flow diagram. There was a nice little exit plan. Of course, it happened much quicker than we thought it would. The name we didn't anticipate. When you're young and you don't know what you don't know, you can walk through brick walls, can't you?
And yes.
Yeah, and that happened. And Kim's dream for him was always, he'd like to have a winery and a little cellar door where you can sit out there and have a good cup of coffee with the punters.
So when you laid out the plan of action for Love Block, did you sit down? What did those goals look like? Because at that point, you've got children, we're not young and impoverished anymore. You've got history in the industry. What does that next set of goals for Love Block look like?
So I think the first thing was when we started Kim Crawford, we sort of were probably the first to really scale up and make a success of what was then called the virtual model. Because back in the mid-90s, Polly, it was the beginning of the internet and things were slow. We faxed things and orders were faxed to us and all that sort of stuff. So it was a different world. So at that time, the traditional model was very much followed here, where you buy the land, you build the winery, then you make the brand and then you sell the wine, right? It was also at a time when New Zealand was just making a bit of headway in the UK, just to start with. So it was a clean slate for us. And I think the difference that we did with Kim Crawford is that we actually said what we did. We weren't scared to say we buy the grape from growers, we make it at this winery, we bottle it at another guy's winery. So essentially what we did there was just to make a brand and wine in it. So at the time, it was quite revolutionary. Now most of New Zealand brands are made that way.
Well, and actually the interesting thing about it, and I want to ask you some questions about this, is that when we look at financials from business plans, projections, it's one of the more resilient, adaptable models. So from our perspective, it's actually something that we recommend for someone who's looking to, for want of a better word, dabble, for someone who's looking to explore wine, but they're not coming in with huge amounts of capital. They're not coming in with investor funding. I look at it and I'm like, oh, this is a great way to go about doing it. So I have to ask, what are the pitfalls?
It's a very profitable model because it's basically all care, no responsibility. You don't have to invest in bricks and mortar. You don't have to invest in land. Things don't break that you have to fix. You don't even have to be a winemaker. All you need to do is to be able to make a brand and sort out a route to market. So it's incredibly profitable if you really apply yourself and you can do the brand and the route to market successfully. So yes, definitely.
But what are the downsides that we don't see?
Right. So in the wine world, people still want to know where things come from. So provenance is one of the downfalls of that, especially if you, and New Zealand wine is at the higher price points. People want to know. People, remember, we're not selling baked beans or toilet paper. We're selling something people want, not need. We may think of wine as a food group, but apparently it's not. So So people want to know. It's a little bit like, your skincare and things like that. You want to know where it comes from, don't you? And people still believe very much in the stories behind wine. And it's really important that we can tell those stories, We told our story with Kim Crawford as a virtual winery, and then the world embraced it at the time. But
and of course, at the time, that was absolutely revolutionary for what you're doing. But going out with that now is not necessarily an innovative model. So do you believe that the lack of provenance, of terroir, of that, of your place, do you believe that that can be overcome by, say, newer winemakers who are exploring the virtual or the winery only model from day dot, with everything that we know now about our consumers, or even perhaps with the proliferation of e-commerce and social media?
Absolutely. I think probably more so now than then, because people are used to this model and people are looking for different things. So, I mean, if we just look at, consumers who prefer, people overlay their values over purchase. So if you're a socially conscious brand and you make a contribution to a charity, then there's a certain group of people who will buy that because of your actions. So there's certainly ways, there are lots of things that you can do in the space. It's quite exciting.
So it's really about finding that story. If you don't have the land from day one, you do have to have an understanding that you need a story. It has to be something that resonates and is valid. So we can't just make shit up. But that has to be a founding part of your brand story. So you talked about values. And I know one of the things when you were setting up Love Block, it was this space that you could actually go in and demonstrate your values. And one of those from day one has been organics. So organics and sustainability. That was 10, 12 years ago, I want to say. Is that right? When first vintages of Love Block started to go out?
We picked the first in 2011,
2011. So that was before a lot of us were sitting around talking about climate change and sustainability and organics in our wine. How much has that been emphasized in your brand storytelling and your marketing?
It's the platform for everything we do. We've always wanted to do something. For me, it's been life-changing looking at the earth that we started with and having practiced organics and, really deep land care, regenerative agriculture for, as I say, 10, 12 years, and to see where we're at the moment. So, and it's not only about, following the sustainability rules that New Zealand wine growers put out there. We have to do those. But for me, it's very much about doing more and looking at the bigger whole. So it's not only looking at grapes. We're looking at a farm as a holistic unit. So you grow grapes, but we also have paddocks, which we can't grow grapes on, where we have animals. And we're now going into planting a lot of trees again. It's because we're in that process of going to be, hopefully, for the farm to become positive. So for me, it's always you've got to do more, and not only with the wine. It's a bigger part of your whole life, and with climate change, it's been really interesting. I've been digging into the whole carbon economy, and gosh, it can be cynical, very cynical. So it's really easy to just do one thing, put a carbon click on your site, sell your wine, and then carbon positive. But my question is always, what good am I doing? And little things count. Little things really count. So we're looking very deeply at the whole of as a holistic and biological whole, and what we do and how things affect each other. And then, of course, we're changing our approach a little. I always wanted to do Love Block organic beef, and the paddocks have been organic for about 10 years, and the cattle have been organic for about 4. But there is no slaughterhouse in the South Island. So we've got to put them in a ferry and take them to the North Island. And it just doesn't make sense because they'll be freaked out when they get there and the cost will be blown out and no one's going to be able to buy that. So we're giving up on that. But what we do is, I very much believe that everyone who works on that farm shares and must be fed from the farm. So obviously there is meat, there is vegetables, and so on and so forth. So it's that whole permaculture. It's a philosophy. It's not only growing grapes to which you supply the sustainability rules of New Zealand. There's more, and also taking it through to my private life. Look at our consumability, fixing ththings. People for years, people have bought a cheap shirt, the button goes, you just throw the thing out, and now people. I know you sew.
I'm a hippie.
Yeah, and now we're starting to fix things again, like we grew up. So it's taking that whole thing right through the line, down to the granular level of your personal life. And I think if we all make a little bit of a difference, things change.
Have you seen a difference in the reception of that messaging?
Yes, for sure. I think that when we first launched the brand in, early 2014, there was little appetite for organic wine. You really had to work it. And I think this particularly last 5 years, I've seen tremendous change. And as organic wine growers, we also have to learn to message better, because it's more about what you don't get with organic wine than what you do get, So there's a whole lot of aspects. People don't understand biodynamics. People don't understand sustainability. People understand that there are rules with organics, and so that's an easy place to start. I know that there's a whole new category of clean wine, which I'm not even going to raise. But a lot of what the clean wine people are purporting, we in New Zealand already do, and because I think it's that whole Antipodean understatement that we just don't tell the world what we do and how good we are.
Yeah, I strongly agree with that. And also, I think what happened with a lot of early organic consumables, not talking about things that came out of the ground, but, coffee was a great example, is that so much of things that were certified organic, they didn't necessarily taste good. We knew that people were buying them because they fit the organic bill. And so it was a really tricky space. I know we've dealt with this with some clients of whether or not you actually publicly. So do you get a certification? Do you use a sticker? Is it, how prominent is it in all of your marketing collateral? So, certification. Do you feel like certification is important for credibility of the work you're doing?
I think it is because there are many pretenders. But I agree that there is a space where, and certification is not easy. There are different groups of rules, and the US is probably the most difficult. But as we become more and more sophisticated in our winemaking, in the winery, we're overcoming those things. But certification is arduous, it's expensive, and different territories and regions have different rules. So if we're going to have one set of rules or just two sets of rules, it'll be really good. But I think at the heart of everything, you have to be true to what you practice. I think a lot of people in New Zealand step up that one level away, up from sustainability in New Zealand, but just under organics, because life happens and sometimes things happen. Someone sprays something that they're not supposed to, or an inorganic cow enters the property and stuff like that happens. So one has to be pragmatic, and you can tell your story really beautifully, but you've got to have some sort of an illustration. Certification is important.
One of the things that has changed, I think, about organic, it being such a part of everyday discussion now, is that the consumers do realize exactly what you're saying. That there are variations, there are financial implications, and there is a level of resilience that we have to maintain. And also because, and I don't think that this is only an Antipodean thing, it is relative to size of our, of us as actors within an industry. Something that would be absolutely catastrophic to an independent producer might only be a blip for,
Yeah.
one of our huge conglomerates.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, I know that you've got the Anchor estate is organic. You're running with sustainable practices throughout. You've undertaken regenerative agriculture for a very long time now. And now these are conversations that are coming to the fore in wine because of, if nothing else, issues around climate change. I mean, we all understand that we are at the forefront of damage and of damage control. Um, the conversations around climate change in wine are one that I notice happen within our trade spaces and our private spaces, but not so much with our public. How do we actually start communicating with our audiences and our consumers how important, the future of the wine industry is, and why we may need to be looking at, say, lighter bottles and alternate packaging and less shit in our boxes that we send out?
Yeah. I think, firstly, as workers and growers of the land, we see it on a daily basis. It has changed. We used to harvest in April, May. It was always cold. People had leather jackets and beanies and gloves. It was cold. We haven't harvested in April since 2016. And before that, it was a whole bunch of years. Cyclones follow a different path. And over New Zealand, it follows a different path, and it's starting to affect our wine growing regions. We've just seen 45 tornadoes hitting Kansas or something, causing tremendous damage there. And but we really see it at a local level. It is changing, and we need to do something. I find it almost hard to swallow that people can deny climate change. It's happening at a pace that is staggering and eye-watering, and all of us need to make a change.
And then that kind of circles right around to our earliest discussion, which is about pricing. How do we actually then communicate that our harvests are being affected, our industry is being affected, our shipping is being affected, everything about getting our route to market is being impacted. And that has a direct impact on that shelf cost, what that actually goes into their hands for. And I guess, one thing that we have seen is there's the recent petition that did go out through the Washington Post. I think it was Dave McIntyre wrote about that, where it was the petition to actually disclose bottle weights, if I'm recalling correctly, in tasting notes or tech sheets. Again, though, that's information that's going out to our gatekeepers. It's the notion of how do we communicate that to our drinkers in a way that they care. And they're like, yes, I'm going to pay you more, or I'm going to respect the lighter bottles.
Yes. So, because of course, especially in America, people love the heavy bottle because it's a quality cue in people's eyes. So we call bottles by its weight, right? So we've always, because La Block is a premium brand, we put it in what we call the 550, meaning the thing weighs 550 grams. And it came in from China. So imagine the footprint. Shipping, heavier bottle, and then we ship it back out. Stupid. What was I thinking? So we just changed to a 417. So shaving off 100 and whatever grams of one bottle. And it makes 1.68 kilograms difference to a case. You really feel it when you pick it up. So we just have this vintage have changed to the lighter bottle. Moreover, it carves, I think something like 15% of your carbon footprint, because most of the carbon expended in wine is packaging and freight to an extent, but packaging is a major one. So the first and simplest thing to do is change to a lighter bottle.
So from bottles, where to? I mean, do you see that there will ever come a point where a premium organic wine, for value reasons, is moving into a can? into a Tetra Pak, into any kind of alternate packaging just to lighten that up? And will consumers ever accept that? Ever's a big
I think
word.
that young people do.
You think young people do?
I think they do, yeah. I mean, we've seen it with tin cans. I haven't really looked at the carbon footprint and the recyclability of tin cans, but, one bottle of wine is 6 pours. And if you take, you fit 4 little tin cans. So look at the tremendous amount of packaging that you're creating. And,
right.
and that I also want to say something about online shopping. So it's all great and it's all online, but my God, the packaging that's being created is phenomenal. So
the packaging is incredible. I don't know if no, because in New Zealand, you won't be ordering from Amazon. Here in Spain, I use Amazon more than I'd like to. I do it because it's really good service. I can send something back, which is important when working in a language that I don't work with. But I look like I'm running a cardboard shop half the time in my office. Yeah.
So what is the carbon effect of all of that? So what good are we really doing, the net? And I think people find it incredibly confusing. I do. But Polly, I'll tell you a little story. My nephew lived in the Ukraine. It must be, I think he came back 10, 12 years ago. And he lived in the Ukraine for a good 7 years. And in the middle, and it was like a time warp. And people there's only one shape of jar. So your mayonnaise, your pickles, your jams, everything comes in the one shape of jar. And then it gets recycled. It gets washed. It gets a new lid and you stick on your particular label. And that is called communism. But is it really such a stupid idea? No, it's not. If you go to the supermarket next and you want to buy something like, say, olives. I mean, it's fat bottles, skinny bottles, tall bottles. And we now use single-serve glass because we buy, So I'm just putting this out there. Is it really such a bad idea to have one shaped jar and put everything in it and then you make your individuality on your label? But the Western world will never accept that because it's taking away individual thought and individual rights, etc. But it's not such a stupid idea.
Well, I guess the real takeaway from that is that those places do exist. I mean, we've got a few of them there near, where you and I are, but it's entirely consumer driven. And the shops that are catering to it are coming because they're seeing a consumer need for it. So what we have is a space where, as brands, whether it's wine brands or mayonnaise brands or olive brands, we have to actually just keep our eyes open to what those opportunities are. So I know we're coming to the end of our time, but on your website, you have a great statement that I just kind of like to round this out with. You say, if we don't chase the impossible sights, the improbable blends, the exquisite flavors, then nothing will change. What do you think is the thing? What do you think is the thing that needs to change immediately?
In New Zealand, everybody talks about Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc being so dominant, and we grow, as you know, absolutely fantastic other things. I think in New Zealand, it's telling our story of these other wines and getting them to those markets.
Our voice.
Yeah, our voice. I think we need to be a little more forceful. And I think that was one of the reasons why King Crawford worked so well in the beginning, because I wasn't from here. So I didn't have cultural constraints of what I was supposed to say, not supposed to say. Here the Kiwis are great. If they don't want to say no, they just go, And so for me, I took it as a yes.
Excellent.
And so it's. I think we need to. We're a lot more international now, of course, but I think it's telling the story of our diversity, and everybody wants to do the same thing. I mean, South Africa got the same complaint as we have. It's so diverse. I think New Zealand's a great place of innovation. If you look at things in the vineyard that have changed in Australia and New Zealand, because labour is a massive problem for us, and we're going to, whether we like it or not, have to look at further mechanisation. The human hands are just getting fewer and fewer, far between. And in adversity comes great creativity. And this happened in 2008 when, we faced a different sort of a problem with too much grapes. And so someone invented this absolutely monstrosity. It's in a good way that helps us with the pruning, and now there's a second and third generation, which is much more kind of it. So it's in these times that we're so good at coming up with things. And also in terms of, as you know, we very much exploring alternative tannins, the use of alternative tannins in tea, particularly ones coming from teas. So that's green tea, rooibos, honeybush. The biggest problem I have there is regulatory, because people don't understand that it's still a tannin. It just comes from a different source. So we're breaking those barriers at the moment. But that's what I think we're good at, really. We've just got to keep on pushing and not sit in this comfortable sofa of Sauvignon Blanc.
Understood. Right there with your girlfriend. And and as a marketer, if I could say, it's not just New Zealand, it's not just Australia. It's kind of like everyone who's not American. It is about having the confidence to share those stories with almost hyperbole, like being grounded in the fact that the work that we're doing is, whether it's innovative or whether it's just expressive, or, whether it is absolutely classical and we have to cherish it, whatever it may be that your brand is bringing to the table, owning that space. And from that then comes the loyalty, the awareness, the ability to lift those prices when we need to, the consumers who will stick with us when we have terrific vintages, but also when we have absolutely shite vintages, which sometimes does happen. Erica, thank you so much. I know that you had to shoehorn us in this morning, but I'm grateful for it. And even though everyone who's listening won't see the video, I will. It's wonderful to see your beautiful face from very far away. So thank you. I'm grateful.
Nice to see you too, Polly. I miss you.
And that's a wrap for this week's episode of Uncorked. Thank you for listening, and a very special thank you to my friend Erica Crawford for joining us today. The Italian Wine Podcast is among the leading wine podcasts in the world, and the only one with daily episodes. Tune in each day and discover all our different shows. Be sure to join us next Sunday for another look at the world of wine marketing.
Hi everybody! Italian Wine Podcast celebrates its 4th anniversary this year, and we all love the great content they put out every day. Chin Chin with Italian wine people has become a big part of our day, and the team in Verona needs to feel our love. Producing the show is not easy, folks. Herding all those hosts, getting the interviews, dropping the Clubhouse recordings, not to mention editing all the material. Let's give them a tangible fan hug with a contribution to all their costs. Head to ItalianWinePodcast.com and click donate to show your love.